The videos that we do on YouTube should come with kind of a warning sign suggesting the video may have a sell bite, because news keeps changing almost by the minute at the moment when it comes to West Ham. So this was recorded on Wednesday evening, and it's going to go out on Thursday afternoonish. And it's all about who's in charge of making decisions, or who's advising David Sullivan into what decisions to make at West Ham. Are West Ham United gearing up for a massive change in how the team is managed and how transfers are made? Or are we on the brink of going back in time with a selective number of agents who seem to have dominated West Ham transfers over the years because of the close relationships that they've had with David Sullivan? On the one hand, we could see progress with the arrival of Tim Steidten. Look at last summer's transfer window, which resulted in one of our most decent transfer windows that most fans can remember. And then on the other hand, you look at the most recent January transfer window, and it felt as if we were sort of going back in time, where we were slow in bringing in players, and it was suggested, although not corroborated, that certain people were being influencing David Sullivan in his process of what players we should and shouldn't be signing. For example, who advised David Sullivan that we shouldn't be bringing in Ibrahim Osman, the young, promising Ghanaian attacking player from Nordsjælland, who is now signed for Brighton, who will be coming to Brighton in the summer? I guess we will find out whether we've done the right or wrong thing over Osman in time. If he's a success at Brighton, then we've done the wrong thing. If he's not a success, then whoever advised David Sullivan not to sign the player was right. But despite the lack of new player arrivals, there was backroom activity that was going on, which seems to suggest that West Ham are keen to move into a new direction when it comes to future player recruitment. For example, Maurice Steidten, the brother of Tim, was appointed as head of international scouting and recruitment in January. Before joining West Ham, Moritz was a scout for just under 9 years between 2015 and 2024 at one of Steidten's previous clubs, Werder Bremen. It will be interesting to see which parts of the globe Moritz is going to be asked to focus on. In the 9 years that he was at Werder, the club brought in just a handful of overseas players, primarily from Scandinavian countries, but along with one South Korean and one recently from Argentina. West Ham are very keen to continue their forage into the American market, as well as South America, with the relationships already being developed in Brazil by Rob Newman. Remember him? What's going to happen to him now that Moritz is international scout? We don't know. And if West Ham were sensible, they would also be looking at the Asian market and the African market for players in order to expand their reach in those regions as well. We were told that Steidten recently visited the Asian Cup. That's Tim Steidten visited the Asian Cup hosted in Qatar. So it's likely that Asia may indeed be one of Moritz's remits. Then, of course, and the more intriguing backroom signing, was the appointment of Maximilian Hahn. Hahn is the new head of scouting and analysis at West Ham, where he's considered to be one of the best scouts in the world who uses data-driven analysis to identify some of the most prospective young talents around the globe. Hahn was also at Werder Bremen as sporting technologies coordinator, and his history before that is relatively brief, but interesting nonetheless. In 2019, he was assistant manager at Dynamo Dresden for just over a year, before moving to Darmstadt as match analyst for just under a year. He then progressed to become assistant manager at the same club, and then he left for Werder Bremen in July 2022. So a year and a half on, he is now at West Ham, and he's considered that he is the best data analyst around the globe to unearth some of the best young talents in the world. And it's hoped that he will help to improve the second oldest squad in the Premier League. Now, both of these backroom additions are clearly Tim Steidten related. You wouldn't have thought for a minute that anyone would have considered bringing in Steiden's brother, and certainly for Steiden to actually look at changing the way we do our transfers, it would have been his suggestion to have brought in a data analyst. For some time, there's been a desire at West Ham to emulate the player recruitment structure that Brighton have adopted for some time. A data first approach to player recruitment using algorithms to identify talent before scouts actually get involved, which kind of sets Brighton apart from many teams in the Premier League and from probably most teams in Europe as well. Brighton's model also provides them with the ability to consistently replace key players because of the succession planning that's in place, which includes signing replacements early and coaching them in a manager's style of play. So when they do come in, there's a smooth flow from one player to another. And year on year, it has proven to be successful for Brighton, where despite whichever player leaves, it doesn't have a detrimental impact on their playing style or their progression. It's a slow burn, but we can all see the progression that Brighton have made over the past few years. And then we look at West Ham, and the polar opposite exists. There seems to be a consistent need to build almost a whole new team in every summer transfer window. We don't need just one or two additions to our squad. We end up needing half a dozen or so in order to stand still. And this coming summer is going to be no different because we're going to need at least 7 players just to replace those who are out of contract, to replace those that are likely to be sold and who have already left, and to replace quite an aging squad. I've mentioned earlier, we've got the second oldest squad in the Premier League. But the way we recruit players always seems to be a bit of a muddle. And last summer, despite its successes, was riddled with apparent disagreements on player targets, which led to what seemed to be compromises in our recruitment. In came James Ward-Prowse, a Moyes choice, alongside Dinos Mavropanos, Alvarez, and Kudus, who are all somewhat credited to Tim Steidten. Fast forward to January, and another Moyes target, Calvin Phillips, was brought in, and that was it. And again, we heard stories of disagreements between Moyes and Steidten as to who else we should be targeting. And this time, the added twist that agents were advising Sullivan against players that Steidten was recommending. So the obvious need to change our player recruitment is riddled with some strange desire to cling on to the past. And the past is where agents like Barry Silkman come in, who has had a great influence over David Sullivan over the years. Now, when it comes to player recruitment, Sullivan's input has had its successes. He's been involved in the transfers of players like Angelo Ogbonna, Thomas Soucek, and more recently, Lucas Paqueta. So it's evident. So it kind of feels like the old ways of player recruitment are clashing with the desire to use data-driven analysis to identify up-and-coming talent that Steidten has introduced. It's evident that data-driven player recruitment is part of Steiden's project that we keep hearing about. But at the same time, we know that players are offered to Sullivan by agents, and we also know David Moyes wants to scout players for himself, not just once or twice, but several times over. So there are 3 transfer approaches that seem to be clashing at West Ham United at the moment. But which of these has got to take centre stage? Steidten operates in a very different way to the way David Moyes does, and to the agents who want to get their next commission by suggesting players directly to David Sullivan. Steidten has taken a modern approach, and he's been successful with it both at Werder Bremen and at Bayer Leverkusen, with everyone now seeing how Steiden's influence at Leverkusen has really paid off. And when we talk about West Ham reaching the next level, is it going to work under David Moyes' desire to always recruit players with proven Premier League experience? Or is it going to work under agents who are offering players to Sullivan, whether they meet the needs of West Ham United or not? Or is it going to work under a man who has demonstrated so clearly that data alongside scouting is the way forward? I kind of think we all know what the answer is. But is Tim Steidten going to be given a free rein at West Ham United? Um, from the outside, we seem to have what many believe to be power struggles at West Ham. The power struggles include what I've already said. But is this really the case? And that power struggle may lead to someone like Tim Steidten probably deciding to walk away from West Ham United. Now, if this really is the case, is Steidten going to stick around? Is he going to stick around long enough to win this battle, or might he become frustrated um, in order to start thinking that perhaps his project lies elsewhere rather than West Ham United? And herein lies the issue when we heard recently that Liverpool are thinking about the possibility of bringing Steidten in to replace their director of football that's leaving imminently. The summer transfer window was a compromise, as already mentioned. And despite that, Steidten and also the January transfer window was not a success. But despite that, Steidten was bigging up the introduction of Calvin Phillips, saying that we needed to bring in leaders into the team. The transfer window was a disaster, really, to be quite honest with you. Losing 4 players, senior squad players, bringing in one who was clearly unfit, that wasn't necessarily the highest priority, and completely ignoring what we all knew we needed, either a striker or a left-sided attacking player. Now, I doubt very much that Steidten, despite his praising of Calvin Phillips, would have been happy with the January transfer window overall. And we're hearing rumours that he was also quite frustrated in being denied several suggestions that were either being turned down by David Moyes or being turned down by David Sullivan. But whilst we continually hear conflicting stories about Steidten being frustrated, we then see what's happening in the back room, by bringing in Moritz Steidten and bringing in Maximilian Hahn. So now, to stir things up even more, Tim Steidten's ambiguous response to the Liverpool links, suggesting that he's flattered, sort of put a little bit more in the mix. Now, in the interview with Florian Pettenberg on Sky Sports Germany, Steidten talked quite positively about his time at West Ham so far. But in further releases of that interview, Steidten also talked about the link to Liverpool. And he said, "I've heard that I'm supposed to be on the list at Liverpool. It is one of the biggest clubs in the world, so it's an honor. But so far, no one from Liverpool has contacted me. So far. I generally feel comfortable at West Ham. Generally feel comfortable. Not I'm absolutely enthused to be at West Ham. I generally feel comfortable at West Ham. I quickly realised the intensity that this league has. Accordingly, we signed the right players in the last summer transfer window. The squad is strong, dubious, so that we can achieve our goals. I'm also looking forward to the next few weeks and months until the end of the season. Of course, we're already planning the next transfer window at West Ham. But what happens in the future, we will see." Now, that's an open door, isn't it? That's an open door to suggesting to Liverpool, if you really want me, come and make an offer and let's see what we can do. So Steidten is clearly leaving that door wide open. And that means that David Sullivan has got a massive choice to make. Does he stick with David Moyes and give him a new contract and allow David Moyes to continue dictating and overruling what players he wants at West Ham? After 4 years and nearly £500 million spent, to have the second oldest squad and the smallest squad in the Premier League seems to suggest that we already know what the answer to that may be. He can go with option 2. He can go with letting David Moyes go at the end of the season when his contract expires. He can bring in another manager who may be easier going so that Sully can start doing player deals again with preferred agents. And But again, after several years of doing this, Sullivan has proven that he too is no guru in the transfer market. Look, those first two options have led to them continuously having to pay West Ham continuously having to pay high prices and high wages to bring players in who are not necessarily going to be the future of West Ham, but who are going to be the fixes for now, and who would not provide a return on players who would then need to be sold. Look at the number of players we've sold over the last few years for much less money than we've signed them for. If Sullivan wants to continuously lose money in that way, then we're never going to build a strong squad enough to take us to the next level that everybody wants. We have wasted so much money on transfers because we've either had to buy players or the wrong buy players for the wrong money, wrong prices, or the wrong players that don't fit into our system, etc. And again, age prohibits West Ham to actually get any benefit out of those players in the future. Or what David Sullivan can do, he can go with option 3. He can go back to believing why he brought Tim Steidten to West Ham United in the first place, and he can allow this man to have full reign over transfers whilst working alongside Mark Noble, Moritz Steidten, Maximilian Hahn, and all the other scouting network that we've got at West Ham, and allow him to implement what he built at Bayer Leverkusen in creating a young squad, a stronger squad, and also making profit from that transfer business, where we can build a player up, and have another player lined up to replace him if we go and sell that young player for a lot more money elsewhere. So it's kind of crunch time for David Sullivan, and he really needs the balls to make the right decision that is best for West Ham United long term.